countdown, we have the Antikythera mechanism. In the 1900s, a team of divers exploring a Greek island made a fascinating discovery. They came across an ancient shipwreck. The ship was filled with statues, jewelry, coins, pottery, etc. But the weirdest thing the ship contained was this blob of corroded bronze and wood. 2 years later, an archaeologist decided to examine this, and it was discovered that it was some sort of astronomical clock. But the items came from ancient Greece, and clocks hadn't been invented then. So it's pretty weird. That's suspicious, as Cardi B would say. So this item was in similar size to a mantle clock. The bits of wood fragments on it suggest that it was probably in a wooden case. They also believe the case would have had a large circular face with rotating hands. There was also a knob on the side, and the mechanism could rotate forwards or backwards. Needless to say, it was a fairly complex object for that time period, so some believe that it was left by time travelers. Moving on to number 9, we have the Viking sword. And guys, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up because it really helps us out. Archaeologists unearthed the Viking sword Ulfbert that dates back from 800 to 1000 AD, and I hope I said the sword's name right, or else you guys are gonna just come at me in the comments. So this was quite shocking since they didn't have technology to make those kind of swords back then. It was only available 800 years later during the Industrial Revolution. So what's up with that? Jerry Seinfeld, what's up with that? Not only that, but its carbon content is 3 times higher than other swords of its time. It suggests that iron ore must have been heated to at least 3000 degrees Fahrenheit to make this sword. And they didn't have that kind of technology to do that back then. So everyone is just freaking confused. It might have been dropped by a time traveler or something like that. In our 8th spot, we have the drill bit. So for this point, a weird drill bit was found in a piece of coal. Okay, so maybe a worker lost it while working in the mines or shoveling some coal. But no, the piece of coal that it was found in was said to have formed hundreds of millions of years ago. You know, back when they didn't have drill bits. How was it that this ended up in coal? Could it be part of a time machine that fell out during the traveler's journey? Who knows? But it's pretty weird and an unexplainable discovery. Not to mention the coal was around 22 inches thick and buried down 7 feet. It just makes no sense. Moving on to number 7, we have the brass bell. Here's another weird object found inside of coal. I feel like we could just do a whole list on top 10 weird objects found in coal. So basically, in 1944, a 10-year-old boy by the name of Newton Anderson was shoveling coal into his furnace at his house. That's when a piece of coal was dropped and it broke in half. Inside the coal, there was this mysterious bell. But the coal that he was using was said to be around 300 million years old. Back then, the dominant life form on Earth was insects. So obviously they weren't using bells. Also, the bell contains an unusual mixture of metals including copper, zinc, tin, arsenic, iodine, and selenium. Not a typical combination used to make objects. Now, a man named Boris Balaz ended up taking the bell to the geology department at the University of Delaware. They conducted studies and discovered that the bell was handmade. So again, how on earth is this possible? And what time traveler brings a bell with them on their journey? Seriously, out of all things, a bell. In our 6th spot, we have the DINO figures. In 1944, thousands of little dino-looking figurines were dug up in Mexico. I mean, okay, that's cool, I'd buy a figurine of a dinosaur. The only problem is that people and dinosaurs didn't exist at the same time. There were around 32,000 carved pieces. The pieces date back to 2500 BCE, a time when there were no dinosaurs around, and people couldn't have possibly known about them. This is all according to scientists. What does this even mean? Like, were there some other creatures that roamed the earth back then that we don't know of? Or is there a time-traveling paleontologist out there? We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the COSO artifact. In 1961, 3 rock hunters were exploring the mountains of eastern California with hopes to find geodes to sell at their gift shop. They gathered a bunch of them and then took them back home where they proceeded to cut them in half. However, one of the geodes practically broke their new crystal saw in half when they were trying to get it open. Instead of finding crystals inside, they actually discovered something more intriguing. Inside this rock mass was a perfectly circular porcelain-like section. In the center of the section was a tiny magnetic pin. An X-ray of the rock revealed that there was also a spring or helix at one end. From there, people realized that it resembles a modern-day spark plug. However, it's theorized that this rock is about 500,000 years old. But spark plugs were not invented until the 19th century. Again, is this a piece from a time machine or what? In our fourth spot, we have the ancient laptop. In a sculpture from 100 BC, it depicts what appears to be a young girl holding open a laptop for another woman. Of course, they didn't have laptops back then, so what is this? Not gonna lie, it does look like a laptop. And if it's not, then what is it? People then thought, okay, maybe it's a jewelry box, but the width of the structure is too narrow to be a jewelry box. Now here's something to think about. Look back at the old Greek tales about the Oracle of Delphi. This was said to allow the priests to connect with the gods. In return, they give them advanced info. Many believe that this was given to them from the gods. Not only that, but the thing she's holding has two holes in it. Maybe one for a charging cable and the other for a USB key, perhaps? I don't know, that's just what people think. Moving on, number 3, we have the gold airplanes. A couple of years ago, researchers were studying the Incas when they discovered they left behind some interesting objects. One was a small golden figurine that closely resembles a modern jet plane. Upon analyzing them, people have noticed that the figures have what appears to be wings, a stabilizing tail, and landing gears. But of course, they didn't have planes back then, so isn't that interesting? Ancient astronaut theorists are convinced that the Incas somehow knew what planes were. This has led people to believe that maybe they were in contact with aliens. In our second spot, we have the old hammer. Back in 1934, a hammer was found in Texas. The hammer was encased in stone. This stone was said to be more than 100 million years old. Which brings up the question, how the hell did they have hammers 100 million years ago? The hammer was complete with a wooden handle and everything, but it had turned to coal because of the age. This suggests that this hammer was made even before humans were around. I'm telling you, some time traveler went back 100 million years ago and then left their damn hammer. Or maybe their machine broke down and they tried to fix it, but were unsuccessful and got stuck there. And all that survived was their lone hammer. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Egyptian hieroglyphs. This one is pretty crazy, not gonna lie. So upon studying ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, scientists noticed some unusual glyphs present. These glyphs looked exactly like modern day planes and helicopters. Obviously, they didn't have planes and helicopters back then, so this is crazy! These glyphs were found in a temple in Egypt and are said to be roughly 3,000 years old. There's drawings of insects and birds, and then you can clearly see what looks like those two aircrafts. So there are a couple of theories here. Number 1, Egyptians are smarter and way more advanced than we thought. They didn't have planes, but maybe they were already drawing blueprints for them. Theory 2, they were visited by alien life forms, and what they were drawing are the alien spacecrafts that they saw. Or 3, they developed time travel and saw into the future. And then they're trying to tell others about what they saw in the future through these glyphs.
At number 10, we have the sarcophagus of MENKAURE. The Great Pyramids house some of the most important people of their day. You have to imagine if thousands of people died to build a monument just to put a dead body in, then you'd have to be someone pretty important. I'll be lucky if my ashes get kept in a mayonnaise jar. But one of the pyramids of Giza was the sarcophagus of MENKAURE. This was found by British explorer Howard Vyse. This should be no surprise, this was back in the 1800s, and we all know how much the English loved to come through and take everything. One of the craziest things about Vyse's excavation of the pyramids was the fact that he used explosives to blast his way inside. This dude clearly had a ton of respect for the architecture. Eventually, this guy's demolition style of getting into a pyramid got him what he wanted. He was face to face with the sarcophagus of MENKAURE. He hauled this thing out and then he slapped it on a boat to send it back to England. Well, on the way back, heck, the boat sank, and since then the treasure has been lost to man. Coming in at number 9, we have the menorah of the Second Temple. The English weren't the only ones who would go around taking cool stuff from cool places. I mean, let's be honest. If we go back in time far enough, we will find that every group of people took things from everywhere. Well, the Romans thought that they would take a trip down to Jerusalem to steal the menorah of the Second Temple. They didn't destroy it, but they brought it back to the Temple of Peace. That is a very strange thing to call a place where you keep a bunch of stolen artifacts from foreign places. Like, oh, this is the Temple of Peace? How did you get that menorah? Ruthless bloodshed? Yeah, that seems nice. Well, the Temple of Peace was eventually burnt to the ground, and it's unknown if the menorah of the Second Temple survived this. Really, there's two options here. Either it was destroyed along with the temple, or it was taken to Carthage by a group of people called the Vandals. And guys, remember to hit that like button because it really helps us out. Coming in at number 8, we have the Barber dimes. Now, the first thing that comes to mind when I say the Barber dimes is me walking out with a fresh haircut. You know what I'm saying? But this is actually something much more valuable than me looking really good. The Barber dimes were minted back in 1907, and they used to be very common, but now there's only a few of them left. That's not the part that makes this story so interesting. There is a treasure of missing Barber dimes that could be somewhere in Colorado. 6 massive barrels of Barber dimes were transported through Colorado, and back in 1907, they never showed up to their destination. They could have been stolen, or they could have fallen into the Colorado Black Canyon. If you were to find this stash of dimes today, because of how rare they are and how many there are, they would be worth millions of dollars. So, not a bad find. Coming in at number 7, we have Sappho's poems. Sappho is considered one of the greatest minds of ancient Greece, and while there's quite a bit of her work that the world has been able to salvage, it would seem that her poems were lost to the world. I'm not one to dip into poems that often, or really ever, but it would have been so interesting to see what poetry looked like in ancient Greece. Also, so much of the literature and knowledge from that era was written and cataloged by men. So it would be cool to see what that era looked like through the eyes of a woman. I mean, I suspect that it would all be insightful pieces that opened up my mind, but they might have just been love stories or the regular frustrations of typical poetry. I don't know, dude. They were lost and we can't read them. I would hope that one day we find these poems and everyone thinks that they're beautiful and they change the way we interact with each other, but when she wrote them, she thought that they all sucked. That would be very funny. Coming in number 6, we have the Lost Library of the Moscow Tsars. One of the greatest groupings of ancient writings was put together by the Grand Duchy of Moscow. He collected writings from several ancient civilizations, including the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, and it's thought that many others were also housed in this place. The location and contents of this library were always very secret. It became an even bigger secret when Ivan the Terrible was in power. It said that Ivan hid the library so the knowledge would never leak into anyone's hands except his own. Well, we know that Ivan was eventually killed in a revolution, and it's thought that the location of the library was also lost with him. Either that or the people revolting decided to burn the writings, not knowing what they were or how to read them. Or the library could still be somewhere out in Moscow waiting to be discovered. It would be a great find that would open up the world to a priceless collection of literature from a almost forgotten time. Coming in at number 5, we have Blackbeard's treasure. Blackbeard spent 2 long years out at sea as a pirate. Before that, he worked as a privateer and probably thought the money was trash, and that's why he turned to sinking boats and stealing booty. The boat he rode on was the Queen Mary's Revenge, which is one of the most badass things I have ever heard. But eventually, the law caught up with him and his head was chopped off. But this dude was a little rascal. Before he died, he let everyone know that he had a massive treasure buried somewhere, but he didn't tell anyone where it was. Now, this might have been a pirate's bluff. Something to send out to the world so he would never be forgotten and send a bunch of hopeful men out to sea looking for something that wasn't there. Or maybe he was telling the truth, and there's a multi-million-dollar prize hidden away somewhere. Coming in at number 4, we have the BAYEUX Tapestries final panels. Recording history before the printing press was hard. You had to either write everything down by hand or make a super long tapestry like this one. There's no recording it on your phone and then uploading it into the cloud where it will live forever in a file that no one will ever look at. The BAYEUX Tapestries was created when William the Conqueror smashed through England and reshaped Europe forever. People people think it took years to make, but the last chunk is missing, so there's no conclusion to the story. To this day, no one knows where these final panels are. That would be like if thousands of years from now, someone dug up the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe and everything was there right up to the point where Thanos grabbed the gauntlet from Stark and then it stopped. You know how much that would suck, dude? Give me the end of the story. I need it. I didn't even know this thing was missing until right now, and I'm already rattled. Coming in at number 3, we have JFK's brain. Here's a very strange one. Someone went out of their way to take the brain of the President of the United States after he was assassinated. No one knows who took his brain or where his brain went. There's a lot of theories about this. Some people think it could have been the FBI or the CIA to cover up that there was a second shooter. Other people think that his brother took his brain as evidence. Some people think that the government hid his brain because it revealed that he was slowly dying from some sickness and they wanted that to be hidden from the public. No matter what the case, it seems like it would be pretty hard to lose track of someone's brain when that someone is the president who was just assassinated by being shot in the head. The brain would be something you would want to hold on to for a very long time. Coming in at number 2, we have the HONJO MASAMUNE. This is the last known sword made by the person believed to be the best sword maker of all time. The sword was made somewhere between 1260 and 1340 and passed down from generation to generation. It probably would have outlasted all of us because the craftsmanship is so exquisite, but after World War II there was an order from the Allies to take all weapons from Japanese people in Japan. This stretched to even historical weapons. Once it passed hands from its last owner to the Allied forces, its location was lost to man. The sword might have been thrown in the ocean, it might have been melted down, it might have been stolen and now is kept somewhere safe. But if you are the greatest sword maker in Japan, then that would put you in the running for the greatest sword maker in the world who has ever made swords ever. So this weapon that now is lost could be the greatest remaining sword on the planet. And coming into the number 1 spot, we have Genghis Khan's grave. Probably one of the most ruthless conquerors of all time, this dude had the largest empire in history. The Mongolians are the only people to beat Russia in a land war in the winter. He spread his seed so much that 1% of the planet has his DNA, and he killed so many people that it actually lowered the temperature of the planet. And if we look back to where he came from, he basically was living in a village of tents. You want to talk about started from the bottom, now you're here? This guy did it bigger than anyone. And to cap all of this off, after he was done, he didn't want to be remembered. He didn't want anyone to pray to him or fear him or use him as a force to control other people. He wouldn't let anyone paint a picture of him when he was alive, so anything we see of him was made after he died. So all these images could be highly inaccurate, and he also hid the location of his grave. Genghis Khan requested that he be buried at an unmarked grave in the heart of the Burken Kaldon Mountains. Then everyone who was part of the burial was killed so no one would know the location, and it's rumored that horses were released up the hills so no one could follow tracks. Obviously this guy caused more death than anyone else, but this is still something crazy.
10. Uluru Rock. I'll be honest, I'm a rock guy. I go on vacation, I'm goggles up the entire time. I love looking for geology and history. It's hard not to want to bring something home every trip, right? But depending where you are, you could be in a lot of trouble for doing so. In the Northern Territory of Australia, for example, there is a beautiful monumental sandstone formation. It's known as Ayers Rock or Uluru Rock. Now this site is sacred for the Aboriginal people of the land. They respectfully ask that no visitors take any piece of the sandstone home with them. Yet of course, some of us can't follow simple instructions, and in numerous cases, bad luck has followed them home as well. Breakups, death of a loved one, you name it, it's all bad. Why risk it? Just leave things alone, you know? Number 9. Robert the Evil Doll. A man named Rob Otto, he was given a doll that looked a lot like him. One of his servants who didn't like him made him this doll. This was clearly a voodoo doll, right? Obviously, this is an obvious trap. Neighbors would then hear Robert talking to this doll. Robert and Robert the podcast, I guess. I don't know, tune in. Now, after Robert's untimely death, the new owners of the house found that same doll. They found it in the attic, still there. That family was haunted afterwards by the same doll. They would hear threats coming from it at night, so now the doll is on display at a museum in Key West. No more threats, just glass cage forever. Number 8. Elmo. The Sesame Street icon has been in homes for many, many years. There was a literal stampede when Tickle Me Elmo was released. An employee was sadly trampled, got his ribs broken, is horrible. People go crazy for these things. When the Elmo Knows Your Name toy was launched by Fisher-Price back in 2005, there were 15,000 names ready to go. Only one family was traumatized. Only one. That's not bad, all things considered. That Elmo toy toy apparently spoke on its own, threatening to harm the family, often, so they tossed it out immediately. This happened more than once though. The audio sounded off for some devices in some homes. Be Like Elmo sounded like Beat Up Elmo. The Elmo phone was also released in 2009, and it often said 456, but in some cases it sounded like Who Wants to Have Very different things, those two. Those are two different phrases. Those are not the same at all. We're all learning things with Elmo, whether you like it or not. Number 7. Belcourt Castle chairs. This one's like the opposite of musical chairs. These chairs are no fun at all. This Rhode Island ballroom is beautiful. It's a cottage mansion, a lot of wood, a lot of history. It smells great, I bet. I would have bet that there would be a ghost woman in the ballroom. Turns out it's actually a handful of chairs. Who knew? That was my second guess. Handful of chairs. That's good. Visitors have reported an eerie feeling when standing close to these chairs. They get the chills, they get this sense of energy almost. Now, things certainly go a step further. Some guests have seen the chair move on their own, or they've had the chairs push against them, all of course by some invisible force. I'm not sure if I believe in ghosts personally, but if I saw a chair moving, yeah, that would do it. Just one of those would definitely flip my beliefs for sure. Haunted furniture, that gets me. That's pretty bad. Number 6, the haunted skull. I'm pretty sure every skull is haunted. No, but I don't know. This one specifically, ooh, this one's real haunted though. Here we go. Located in the Burton Agnes Hall over in England, the screaming skull sits quite still, but its curse is very real and very active. The screaming skull once belonged to Catherine Ann Griffith, who died in 1620. Now, reports of strange figures or shadows around the skull, that's one thing, but many people believe they can still hear the screams of one Catherine Ann Griffith to this day. Number 5, the unlucky mummy. Right off the bat, the unlucky mummy isn't an actual mummy per se. It's rather the lid of a coffin that once belonged to a high status woman who lived sometime around 950 BCE. So a little old, little time ago. The mummy board wasn't seen again until the early 1800s AD. It was found in Thebes. 4 Englishmen found it, and of course they were celebrating this ancient piece of history, but it didn't take long for all 4 of those men to pass away from mysterious circumstances. If you're looking for more top 10s on ancient history, come meet me over on our top 10 history channel. It's called Bumblebee. We do top 10s only on historical stuff. Ancient eras, mummies, silly Victorian era hats, cool shoes, I don't know, you name it. It's all over at Bumblebee. See you there. Number 4. Mandy the Haunted Doll. Mandy lives in the Quesnel Museum in Canada. Awesome, nice and close to home. The staff of the museum insists that Mandy is kept in a separate display case all by herself, because when she's with other dolls, she would end up knocking them over somehow, some way. Staff also reported that their lunches would disappear and that photos of the doll would end up glitching out. The lunches disappearing, that's for sure one dude who's blaming ghosts. That's actually not a bad plan. I'm okay with that. But the photos, that's terrifying. That's a surefire sign that it's haunted. Number 3. The Great Bed of Ware. We figured we'd get nice and cozy for this next one. For starters, it's massive, and it's cozy. It looks like the bed a king would certainly sleep in, and rightfully so. The Great Bed of Ware was built for the royal family back in 1463. It was 12 feet by 12 feet. Jonas Fosbrook, a carpenter from that time, they impressed King Edward IV so much with their work that the king gave them a pension for the rest of their life. People would travel all across the land to see this bed. That's a fun family vacation. Yeah, we're gonna go see a bed. Yeah, Disneyland's closed today. Let's go see this bed. Shakespeare mentioned this bed in his play The Twelfth Night, okay? This is a big deal. All those who stayed in the bed though, they did not have a good night's rest. No, instead they woke up to scratches and bruises, or they would wake up just on the floor. Yeah, somehow they would roll out of a 12-foot bed. Today it can be found in the Victoria and Albert Museum in case you want to go in there and take a nap. Would you stay the night in this old haunted, dirty, and probably very uncomfortable bed? Sound off below. I definitely wouldn't. Number 2. The Baker's Wedding Dress. Back in 1849 in the small town of Altoona, Pennsylvania, Elias Baker and his wife Hetty lived in the Baker mansion. They had 2 sons and 1 daughter named Anna Baker. Anna had fallen in love with one of her father's employees. Nice. Another steel worker, but her father wouldn't allow the relationship to take off. So Anna vowed to never marry again ever. She locked herself in her room for the time being. And when her father passed away in 1848, she went to find her true love again, but he had since moved on and settled down. Yeah, worst case scenario. So she spent the rest of her days behaving erratically, and her soul apparently still haunts that same wedding dress today. Not just the dress, also the mansion is apparently haunted as well. Guests would report furniture moving around. What's with ghosts and moving furniture? Where were these guys when I was moving? And finally, number 1, the Bassano vase. This vase comes from the 15th century. It made for an excellent wedding gift, of course, in Italy one day, but the night before, the big day, bride sadly lost her life with the vase still in her possession. So the family kept it afterwards, of course, but as the vase was passed down the family line, a pattern began to unveil itself. It was kind of hard to ignore. Whomever held possession of the BASSANO vase died shortly after in some way, shape, or form. Now keep in mind, this was the 15th century, so the average lifespan was 30 to 40 years old on a good day. But after many deaths in the family, it was packed away for good, just to be safe, or so they thought. The vase showed up again in 1988 alongside a note. The note was pretty to the point. It said, "Beware, this vase brings death." End of note. Pretty simple, I like it. Whoever found it was probably like, huh, okay, and then continued on with it. And then it was auctioned for over $2,000 sans note. Weird, they left the note out of that, that's odd. The pharmacist who won the auction, well, you guessed it, passed away within months.
This countdown, we have the stolen artifact of Pompeii. This story has been in the news a lot lately. So after enduring 15 years of bad luck, a Canadian woman returned an artifact that she stole from Pompeii. So this woman, identified as Nicole, apparently stole some mosaic tiles, stones, pieces of plaster, and other little artifacts from the archaeological park of Pompeii during her trip there in 2005. 15 years later, she mailed the artifacts back with a note explaining that she experienced nothing but bad luck after taking the objects. She struggled both financially and physically. In the letter, she wrote that she suffered from breast cancer twice. She wanted to put an end to the curse and didn't want her family to suffer from her actions, so she sent the pieces back.
Moving on to number 9, we have the lost treasure of the Lydians. This treasure was found back in the 60s, and it was seen as one of the best archaeological discoveries of its time. It was found in Turkey, and it was said that there were over 300 pieces of golden ware. If you were down there, you could have been balling out of control, wearing all that fancy jewelry and making yourself look like a stud. But you would quickly become overcome with gold sickness. This is the apparent curse that is attached to these treasures. Gold sickness is when someone will start to get ill over time, but also have an affinity to collect gold. It's like an uncontrollable urge to stockpile gold like you're some sort of dragon. They'll slurp up gold faster than Joey Chestnut scarfs down ice cream. This curse may have been solidified in 2006. One of the pieces was being returned from America to Turkey, and it was discovered to be a fake. That means someone made a replica and then stole the original. Could this curse have pushed them to make this theft, and now the person is somewhere hoarding large amounts of gold? Maybe this is why CEOs do whatever they can to collect large amounts of wealth they can never spend.
Coming in at number 8, we have the ballista balls. Back in the 1980s, a crew excavated hundreds of Roman ballista balls on the border of Israel and Syria. These were used as cannonballs during the Great Revolt. There were so many of them that one man decided to take 2. I mean, surely they wouldn't notice that 2 were missing, right? And honestly, he was right, no one noticed. But in 2015, the balls were returned to the museum's courtyard along with a note from the thief. The note read, and I quote, "I stole them in July 1995, and since then they have brought me nothing but trouble. Please do not steal antiquities." Use that as a warning, folks.
Coming in at number 7, we have voodoo dolls. I mean, we should know that these are not to be messed with, but for some reason people don't take cursed objects seriously, and they pay the price. A pair of voodoo dolls were stolen from an occult museum in New Orleans. The owner said that they noticed this and they didn't feel any sort of anger because they knew that the person who stole them would feel the fury of the dolls before the sun set on the city. When someone says something as ominous as that, you know that they mean business. She continued to say that the museum was the dolls' home, and they will be wicked if they are not returned. Just 2 days later, a man returned with the dolls. Apparently he was missing teeth, missing fingernails, had pus coming out of his gums, and had sores all over his body. And outside of being in an extreme amount of pain, he said that he was haunted by visions of his own death. The museum owner laughed and told him to go to the hospital and gladly took back the dolls.
Moving on, number 6, we have the souvenir. Look, I get it. You go on a vacation somewhere and you want a souvenir or something to remember your trip by. But don't steal. Instead, just go get something from the local gift shop. I mean, that's what gift shops are there for. Now, one place in particular that is a hot spot for thieves is Arizona's Petrified Forest National Park. Over the years, thousands of individuals have stolen petrified forest rocks from there. One woman in particular stole an artifact, and this is what happened to her. She claims, and I quote, "Upon returning home, we first found out that my stepmother had kidney failure. Then our dog died. I had a really close call and having a bad auto accident, our truck broke down needing major repairs, our cat died, and last night a gas well blew out a cap causing us to be evacuated from our home. So please take these pieces back before we have any more bad luck. Man, those objects are extremely cursed. So far, they have had 1,200 antiques returned back to them, all sent with letters saying that they were cursed with bad luck.
Coming in at number 5 is Little Bastard. This is one of the most famous cursed items of all time. This was a car driven by James Dean, and it would end up being his doom. But he didn't steal this cursed vehicle, but there were some people who definitely tried. After the accident that took the life of the famous movie star, the car was taken to a body shop where they started to strip it for parts. One night a group of thieves came in to take off with some parts from this car. Now we don't know if these people targeted the body shop or if they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Well, one of these thieves tried to strip a part off the engine and the whole thing came crashing down on top of him and killed him. The other 2 men got away swiftly, but that was just one of the many deaths connected to the Porsche 550 Spider.
In our 4th spot, we have King Tut's Cobra Staff. So of course, you all probably have heard the urban legend surrounding King Tut and his curse. Basically, it said that King Tut's tomb and all the artifacts that were inside are cursed. And this might indeed be true. After the expedition of King Tut's tomb, several men mysteriously died. Well, rumor has it that this happened all because one of the men stole King Tut's Cobra Staff. Archaeologist Howard Carter claimed that when they found King Tut's tomb, it was already robbed. But this may have been a cover-up. It's thought that him and his team took a couple of artifacts as souvenirs, in particular the Cobra Staff. In fact, one of Carter's team members, James Henry Breasted, returned home to find his pet canary eaten by a cobra, and the cobra was still in the cage. Cobra Staff goes missing, and a cobra is found in his home. Coincidence? I think not.
Coming in at number 3, we have Timur's body. When you take a dude out of his tomb, is that stealing? I think so. During World War II, Joseph Stalin had the bright idea that he would mess around with some dark magic during a pivotal moment of the war. I don't know if he was a superstitious man, but I think he should have been, because maybe he could have prevented this. Timur was one of the most ruthless conquerors in history. It said that 17 million people died because of this dude. He was at the helm of one of the largest empires in history. On his tomb it said, "He who disturbs me shall unleash an enemy more ruthless than I." And on the day that Stalin dug up Timur, Hitler did his surprise attack on the Soviets. Bad move, Stalin. Sounds like you really dropped the ball on this one. Well, I think that Stalin is a stubborn dude and didn't want to bury him again, but eventually he broke and decided that the curse was real and buried Timur again. And then the Soviets had their first victory against the Germans.
In our 2nd spot, we have the Egyptian hieroglyphs. Back in 2004, an unnamed German man stole an ancient Egyptian artifact displaying hieroglyphic text. A couple of months later, the artifact was sent back to Egypt by the man's son. The man had died, so he couldn't do it himself. Apparently, shortly after returning home from his trip, the man's health randomly started to decline. He got unexplained paralysis and fevers. Shortly after, he developed cancer and died. The man's son believed that his father was subjected to the Pharaoh's curse, and he sent the artifact back in hopes to end it.
And coming in at the number 1 spot is the most evil car in America, the 1964 Dodge 330. This vehicle will go down in history as one of the most horrific four-wheelers to ever meet the blacktop. This thing has a ton of spooky events that have been tied to it. It started off as a police cruiser. You think something that had the purpose of serving up justice would have a noble heart. Well, if you had that opinion about this car, you would be dead wrong. There were 3 officers who had the misfortune of driving the 330, and each one of them would die in a murder suicide. It eventually worked its way into the public, and the first owner said that the car seemed like it was constantly trying to kill her as the doors would fly open and the steering would jam while she was on the highway. Eventually, a church caught wind of this devil's chariot, and they went to go vandalize it so no one could drive it again. Every last person involved in this mission died. Some of them were decapitated and others were struck by lightning. Eventually the car was stolen and taken to a chop shop, and where it was broken down into parts, and these parts were separated into different corners of the world so this car could never harm anyone again. God damn.
So moral of the story here, don't steal artifacts. You know what, just don't steal in general. Learn from all these people's mistakes.
Unless you're pirating movies, that's totally fine.
That's not fine.